Ethan Carlisle barely noticed the whirlwind of nurses and doctors rushing around the hospital room. Commands flew past him, clipped and urgent, as if from another dimension. He stood frozen at the doorway, eyes locked on the blood-stained scrubs of the surgeon approaching, his expression heavy with defeat. "Mr. Carlisle, we did everything we could," the surgeon murmured, voice low. The words struck Ethan like collapsing walls. Grace, his grace, was gone. The rest, complications, hemorrhage, unresponsive, sank into an incomprehensible blur. Two nurses gently tried to guide him toward a chair, but he resisted, unwilling to stop moving, unwilling to accept the reality swallowing him whole. His gaze flicked toward the adjacent NICU, where a team hovered over a fragile, barely there shape. He wished, for a fleeting second, that he could vanish before anything else shattered inside him. A neonatologist approached with a rehearsed calm that Ethan found unbearable. "Your son is premature, extremely fragile, but he's fighting." Fighting. The word felt cruel. Grace had fought. Grace had lost. Ethan edged closer to the incubator, trying to understand oxygen levels, lung immaturity, but his eyes were locked on the tiny, translucent form that looked more like a question than a human being. "We need your signature for the next procedures," the doctor pressed, handing a clipboard. Ethan's hand trembled violently as he scrawled his name, jagged and uncertain. "Can he hear me?" he whispered, voice unfamiliar to him. "Maybe," the doctor said softly, "but right now machines are more important than voices." Behind him, Amara Bennett watched with red-rimmed eyes, hands hovering near her mouth, holding back a scream. She had left laundry half-folded, rushing at the call. She had known Grace for years, folded her first date dress, comforted her during complications, and now stared at her still form, shrouded in white. A nurse approached. "Family?" she asked. "I work for them," Amara said, voice cracking, "but she was like a sister to me." The nurse nodded. Her presence mattered, and Amara's tears finally fell. Amara moved instinctively toward Oliver's incubator, the way she had always been drawn to fragile things that needed care. "Hello, little one," she whispered, leaning close to the plastic dome. "Your mama loved you so much." Ethan flinched at the word mama, his shoulders curling inward as though bracing for a blow he couldn't anticipate. Amara ignored him, her attention entirely on Oliver's trembling chest, each shallow rise a fragile testament to life. Her fingers reached into her bag, pulling out a strip of medical tape she had borrowed earlier. With painstaking care, she wrote, "Oliver Carlisle." Placing it atop the incubator dome, she turned to Ethan, whose gaze was a mixture of disbelief and confusion. "Why?" he asked, voice brittle. "Why would you do that?" Amara's cheeks glistened with tears, but her eyes were firm. "So he knows he isn't alone. So the universe knows who it needs to fight for." Ethan looked away sharply, jaw tight, a tremor passing through the stoic shell he had built around himself. Moments later, he stumbled backward, unable to bear the sight any longer. "I can't," he rasped, pressing a fist to his mouth, choking back a grief too vast to name. He turned and walked out, through sliding hospital doors into the indifferent Los Angeles night, releasing a raw, wordless cry that tore through the quiet. Inside the NICU, Amara remained beside Oliver, whispering soft reassurances as the ventilator hissed. Her steady voice threaded through the sterile room like a lifeline. She didn't leave his side, not for a moment, while Ethan wandered the hospital corridors, fractured beneath a sky that offered no comfort. Days blurred, dictated not by clocks but by the fragile rhythm of Oliver's breathing. Every rise and fall of his chest became a heartbeat they both clung to, one through care, the other through silent, fractured observation. The days stretched on, a continuous blur of machines and monitors. Ethan paced the hospital hallways, phone pressed to his ear, approving specialists he barely knew, donations he barely considered. Yet he never crossed the threshold fully into Oliver's room. He lingered outside the glass, catching glimpses of his son's tiny, wired body before retreating, rigid, heart locked behind a wall of fear. Each peek reminded him painfully of Grace, her laughter, the curve of her stomach, her whispered certainty, "He'll look just like you." Meanwhile, Amara moved between worlds. At the Carlisle mansion, she maintained order with quiet, mechanical grace. She folded blankets no one touched, dusted rooms Ethan no longer entered. Marble floors, untouched piano, cold silence. It was all a mausoleum of a family life paused. Yet every evening, like clockwork, she returned to the hospital, where her presence mattered more than any title or paycheck. Sitting beside Oliver, she hummed gospel lullabies her grandmother once sang when fevers raged, notebook open on her lap. Every tiny movement, fingers curling, a heart rate stabilizing, a flutter of eyelids, was logged. Proof of life, proof that Oliver mattered. When Ethan glimpsed her scribbled notes once, he saw a line. "He smiled in his sleep tonight. I think it was for her." He closed the notebook quickly, ashamed to have peeked, yet secretly drawn to the devotion that refused to waver, the love that dared to defy despair. One Thursday evening, the NICU felt heavier than usual. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher, the hum of machines more insistent. A younger, softer-spoken doctor approached Amara in the small consultation room. "We may need to consider comfort measures rather than aggressive intervention," he said carefully, eyes calm, voice measured. Amara froze, her chest tightening. The words felt like nails on fragile glass. "Are you suggesting we just let him go?" she asked, voice sharp with disbelief. The doctor's gaze softened. "We don't want to prolong suffering without hope of quality of life," he explained gently, unaware of the storm his words had unleashed. Amara's mind raced. Quality of life. Those words stung as if they measured Oliver's worth, as though his small, fragile body was already found wanting. She thanked the doctor curtly and excused herself, legs carrying her on autopilot until she found the nearest bathroom. Inside the cold stall, she crumpled against the tile, tears flowing freely. For days, she had carried the weight of watching Oliver fight through machines that hissed and clicked like cold sentinels. She had felt helpless before, in her father's absence, her mother's illness, her grandmother's quiet decline. But this was worse. Watching a life so new, so tender, slip toward the edge without permission to intervene was unbearable. And yet, amid the despair, a spark of resolve began to form. If science couldn't guarantee his survival, she would do everything within her power to fight for him. Amara wiped her tears and reached into her bag, fingers finding the small, worn notebook that had become her lifeline. A faded recipe card slipped out, yellowed and delicate, her grandmother's careful handwriting still legible. Eucalyptus oil, crushed ginger root, warm castor oil, a dash of camphor. For shallow breath, for tired hearts. Her grandmother's voice seemed to echo through the paper. "Some things science can't measure, baby. Some things only love can reach." Memories of her grandmother laying hands on the sick, whispering prayers and coaxing bodies toward life, filled her with determination. Amara had never believed in magic, but she believed in care that could not be coded. The grief quieted, replaced by resolve. She would act, even without Ethan's consent. If she hesitated, Oliver might be gone before she could try. The thought of standing by while a life slipped away was unbearable. Her reflection in the mirror looked back at her, fierce and determined. Whispering softly, she promised, "If no one else will fight for him, I will." Steeling herself, she tucked the notebook under her arm, washed her face, and stepped out of the stall. She had no plan yet, only faith, courage, and the knowledge that Oliver's name deserved to be spoken, his life worthy of every ounce of her attention. The fire in her chest burned quietly, but it was enough to carry her forward into the night. Back in the NICU, the evening air felt charged, heavy with the scent of antiseptic and urgency. Amara settled beside Oliver's incubator, notebook in hand, determined to observe and record every twitch, every breath, every faint pulse. Outside, the city lights cast long shadows through the large windows, but inside, her focus narrowed entirely to the tiny, fragile life before her. Suddenly, alarms shrieked, a sharp, continuous wail that pierced through her concentration. Nurses sprang into action, moving with swift precision. Amara's hands shook, but she stayed close, whispering softly to Oliver, her voice steady despite the panic around her. "You're strong, Oliver. You've got this." Ethan arrived seconds later, pulled in by a frantic nurse from the hallway. His eyes widened, taking in the chaos, heart hammering. Machines hissed and blinked. Oliver's chest rose and fell unevenly. The attending shouted commands, the team responding with practiced urgency. "We're losing him. Last line of intervention." Ethan froze, panic colliding with disbelief. Amara's hands hovered protectively over Oliver as adrenaline surged. She whispered his name, her voice a tether of hope. Amid the chaos, she became the anchor, the voice of perseverance, refusing to let despair take hold. Every nurse, every doctor moved around her, but it was her presence, her unwavering faith, that quietly infused the room with resistance against the tide of uncertainty. Minutes stretched like hours as Oliver's fragile body fought against the machines. The NICU was a symphony of beeps, hisses, and hurried footsteps. Yet Amara's voice remained calm, a steady rhythm in the storm. "You can do this, Oliver. Just breathe." Her fingers gently brushed the incubator's dome, a silent promise that he was not alone. Ethan hovered near the doorway, frozen, powerless, heart pounding. He had seen life and death at board meetings, in financial reports, in the cold calculation of success, but nothing prepared him for the raw fragility of his son. His voice caught in his throat, unable to form words, yet every instinct screamed to reach out, to intervene, to save the child whose tiny life seemed to hang by a thread. Amara's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. "He's still fighting," she said softly, though her words were meant as reassurance for both of them. Ethan could only nod, jaw tight, shoulders tense. She continued her quiet vigil, whispering ancient prayers, coaxing each shallow breath, tracing invisible lines of care and love. Her notebook sat open, every scribbled observation a testament to her determination. Every flutter of Oliver's eyelids, every beat of his tiny heart was logged, celebrated and cherished. In that room, time ceased to exist. The world outside could wait. There were only the machines, the monitors, and the fragile, fighting life that demanded every ounce of attention, faith, and courage Amara could muster. And Ethan, for the first time, understood that sometimes the fiercest battles were fought not with strength, but with love and unwavering presence. The night deepened, and the hospital's corridors grew quiet, except for the rhythmic hum of machines. Amara remained at Oliver's side, her whispers low, insistent, threading through every breath he took. She had memorized every monitor beep, every subtle shift in the incubator's light, as if each was a language only she could understand. Ethan lingered near the glass, pacing in muted desperation. Each time he glimpsed his son, it felt like seeing a reflection of a life he had never been prepared to face, fragile, dependent, and utterly precious. Memories of Lily surged unbidden, her laughter, the curve of her stomach, her soft insistence that he would be a father unlike any other. Those memories clashed violently with the harsh reality of the present, leaving him frozen, caught between grief and hope. Amara noticed his distant gaze but didn't scold, didn't chastise. Instead, she continued speaking to Oliver, coaxing life with gentle words and prayers, passed down from her grandmother. "We're not giving up, Oliver. Not tonight. Not ever." Her hands hovered near his tiny chest, ready to soothe, to guide, to hold, even if only through whispered touch. Hours passed like minutes. The team of nurses rotated, doctors checked charts, yet Amara's vigilance never wavered. Ethan watched her dedication silently, a mixture of awe and helplessness knotting in his chest. She was no mere caretaker. She was the unseen bridge between life and hope, the constant heartbeat in a room suspended between despair and possibility. And slowly, just slowly, Ethan began to realize that this fight was bigger than fear. It was about presence, devotion, and the unyielding belief that even the smallest life deserved every chance to thrive. By morning, exhaustion weighed heavily on Amara's shoulders, but she did not waver. Oliver's tiny body had stabilized just enough for the medical team to breathe, yet every monitor beep reminded her that the battle was far from over. She rubbed her eyes, glanced down at her notebook, and carefully recorded each moment. Oxygen levels, heartbeats, minute movements, a chronicle of survival. Ethan had finally stepped closer to the incubator, hesitating as though crossing a boundary he feared would shatter him. He watched her quietly, the reverence in her routine impossible to ignore. "He's holding on because you won't let go," he murmured, barely audible. Amara's eyes flicked toward him, lips curved in a small, tired smile. "We both won't," she said simply, returning her attention to Oliver. Hours of mechanical humming and whispered prayers passed. Every nurse and doctor who entered the room sensed the shift in energy, the quiet determination that seemed to radiate from Amara. She had become more than an observer. She was a pillar, a lifeline. And slowly the tension in Ethan began to ease, replaced by a tentative hope he had not allowed himself to feel. Though the world outside went on, business calls, meetings, mundane routines, inside this small, fragile room, time had another measure. It was counted in tiny breaths, in trembling hands, in whispered reassurances. And in that space, amidst monitors and machines, love had become the most potent force of all. Ethan finally understood that survival was not just about medicine. It was about devotion, presence, and the unwavering refusal to let a fragile life slip away unnoticed. The following days became a rhythm of vigilance and quiet endurance. Amara never left Oliver's side, moving with a careful precision, her whispered prayers filling the sterile room with warmth and determination. Every tiny twitch, every flutter of his eyelids, every irregular breath was noted in her ever-present notebook, each entry a testament to her refusal to let despair take hold. Ethan remained close, though often at a distance, trapped between fear and awe. He watched her devotion silently, understanding in ways words could not express the depth of her commitment. He caught glimpses of Oliver through the glass, the fragile little body tethered to machines, yet somehow brimming with a stubborn will to live. And it was Amara who gave shape to that will, infusing each moment with a love that transcended reason. The medical team, initially cautious and clinical, began to notice the almost sacred vigilance she maintained. Nurses paused to observe, doctors exchanged subtle glances, acknowledging her presence without interrupting. Ethan, too, began to feel the shift. He realized that Amara's consistency was not just comforting, it was vital. Every action, every whispered word seemed to breathe life into Oliver, a force that no machine or medicine alone could provide. In the quiet hours, when monitors hummed and the city slept beyond the windows, Ethan finally allowed himself to linger near the incubator. He dared to touch the glass, to whisper Oliver's name softly, letting a fragile bond begin to form. And in that moment, the distance between life and hope, between despair and faith, narrowed, held together by one woman's unwavering heart and the quiet courage of a father learning to step into a world he never imagined. Days stretched into a blur of monitors, medications, and whispered prayers. Amara's presence never faltered. She had become the quiet engine sustaining Oliver's fragile body. Her notebook grew thick with observations, heart rates, breathing patterns, minute gestures, each page a testament to her unwavering belief that life could prevail where science seemed powerless. Ethan began to cross the threshold more often, still tentative, still afraid of fully embracing the reality before him. He lingered near the incubator, watching the subtle rise and fall of Oliver's chest, marveling at how something so small could command such gravity over his heart. He noticed the unspoken bond between Amara and his son, the careful way she whispered his name, her hands hovering protectively. It unsettled him at first, but slowly he recognized the necessity of her devotion. The doctor's updates had shifted too. No longer purely clinical, they began acknowledging improvements, slight but undeniable. Nurses exchanged soft smiles when Amara recorded yet another tiny victory, a flutter of an eyelid, a faint smile, a stabilized heartbeat. And through it all, she never sought recognition. Her focus was singular, her mission clear. One evening, as the city lights twinkled outside the hospital windows, Ethan stood beside Amara in silence. He could feel the weight of all that had transpired, the grief, the hope, the relentless fear. And yet in that quiet room, surrounded by the soft hiss of machines and the warmth of a determined heart, he understood something profound. Survival was not just medicine, it was presence, it was faith, and it was the courage to fight for every fragile moment, no matter how small. The following week tested every ounce of Amara's resilience. Oliver's condition wavered, sometimes improving, sometimes regressing, each shift sending waves of tension through the room. Yet she remained steadfast, her hands never still, her voice never faltering. She whispered encouragements, stroked his tiny limbs, and recited the ancient prayers from her grandmother's notebook, letting each word carry hope where the monitors could not. Ethan, now more present, stood closer than ever, though still careful, almost afraid to intrude on the bond between Amara and Oliver. He watched as she soothed his son, as if her presence alone could strengthen his fragile heart. And in those quiet, intense moments, Ethan began to grasp the depth of her commitment, not just to Oliver, but to the possibility of life itself. The medical team, once distant and detached, began to trust her instincts. A nurse would quietly check in, noting her meticulous records. A doctor would pause, acknowledging the tiny signs she had documented. Oliver's body, though still vulnerable, had begun to respond in ways that defied expectation. Small victories, a stabilized heart rate, a more regular breath, were quietly celebrated by Amara with a soft smile, a whispered name, a gentle touch. Ethan finally allowed himself to speak directly to his son, whispering, "You're stronger than they know, little one." Amara glanced at him, eyes warm but steady, and nodded. Together they were becoming a team, a fragile triad of hope, devotion, and love, holding on to the thin line between life and loss. And in that shared presence, Oliver's tiny chest rose and fell, carrying him a little further into the world each day. It was a Thursday night when the tension reached a breaking point. Alarms blared suddenly, slicing through the quiet room like a blade. Oliver's oxygen levels plummeted, his tiny chest struggling against the ventilator. Amara's hands shook as she leaned closer, instinctively murmuring his name, her voice steady despite the panic rising around her. Nurses rushed in, shouting medical jargon, adjusting lines and monitors with practiced urgency. Ethan arrived moments later, pulled inside by the frantic calls. He froze at the doorway, heart hammering, unable to comprehend the flurry of motion. He saw Oliver's blue-tinged lips, the stillness of his hands, the raw vulnerability of the life so tightly tethered to machines. For a terrifying moment, hope seemed to slip away, but Amara would not let it. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, some things only love could reach. With trembling hands, she began the old remedy, carefully applying the mixture of oils and herbs, whispering prayers learned long ago. The room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan watched, helpless yet captivated, as her devotion became the invisible thread tethering Oliver to life. Slowly, minutely, the monitors stabilized. The alarms quieted. Oliver's chest rose with more strength, a flutter of color returning to his lips. Ethan's disbelief melted into awe, and he finally stepped closer, feeling the fragile but undeniable presence of life in his son. And in that moment, amid machines, chaos, and fear, Amara's quiet faith had carved a path where science alone seemed powerless. The following morning brought a fragile calm. Oliver slept more steadily, his tiny body showing signs of resilience that had seemed impossible days before. Amara remained at his side, notebook in hand, recording every subtle movement, every breath, every flicker of life. Her eyes, once red-rimmed with exhaustion, now held a quiet triumph. Ethan stood nearby, watching her devotion with a mixture of gratitude and reverence. He had begun to understand the magnitude of her role, not as a caregiver in name only, but as the anchor keeping his son tethered to the world. The mansion and boardroom, once his entire universe, had shrunk to the importance of presence, of love, of unwavering attention. Nurses exchanged soft smiles when they saw her meticulous notes. Doctors consulted her quietly, acknowledging the tiny victories she had chronicled. Oliver's strength grew incrementally, imperceptible to anyone not watching closely, but to Amara, each flutter of his fingers was a celebration. For the first time in days, Ethan stepped fully into the room, placing a tentative hand on the incubator. "You're doing it, little man," he whispered. Amara glanced at him, nodding, letting him share the moment without speaking. Together they formed a quiet, fragile alliance, one built on hope, persistence, and the unspoken understanding that love could sometimes move mountains where medicine faltered. In the soft glow of the morning, the three of them, Ethan, Amara, and Oliver, were stitched together by survival, trust, and the promise of life yet to unfold. Weeks later, Oliver's health had stabilized, though he remained small and delicate. The incubator still hummed softly, but the fear that had once filled the room had given way to cautious optimism. Amara sat beside him, humming a quiet melody, her notebook resting open with pages full of observations, prayers, and tiny victories. Each entry was a testament to the battle they had fought together, a record of hope that refused to be silenced. Ethan, no longer hesitant, stood fully in the room, holding Amara's gaze. "Thank you," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. She smiled softly, shaking her head. "No, he's the one who fought. I just refused to let him do it alone." The bond between them had deepened into a mutual respect and unspoken understanding, a shared commitment to the life they had saved. Doctors nodded in quiet acknowledgement whenever they saw her. Nurses followed her lead, trusting the instincts she had honed over a lifetime. And Oliver, small but breathing steadily, looked as though he sensed the love and vigilance surrounding him. Ethan reached into the incubator, touching his son's hand gently, feeling the faint grip of tiny fingers around his own. The mansion no longer felt hollow. The hospital no longer felt sterile. The three of them, father, son, and the woman who had refused to give up, were bound together by the fiercest force of all, unwavering love. And as sunlight filtered through the ICU window, Amara whispered, "You're home now, little one." And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the world outside the incubator seemed full of promise.